I'm going to ask you guys to just give us a quick intro of who you are and what you do, and then I'll spend a couple minutes just kind of talking a little bit high level on the creation and Atmos and stereo direct piece, because I know this has kind of been a really big focus. I want to make sure I cover a couple of things, but then we want to get into talking to you guys. So Dustin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my name is Dustin Richardson. I've been terrorizing the music community since about 2012 in Nashville. Audio engineering, music production, musician. Music first for me always. I came down here to play drums. Look at me now. I wanted to record a band or my band, and that led me to engineering. I thought it would be easy. Turns out it's not. 120% into the engineering direction, and I have been lucky to be at this studio since about early 2017 when it was House of Blues and transitioned into East Iris. Then I got to dive into Atmos, and I've been mixing pretty much every day in Dolby Atmos since.
Some of the folks you've mixed: Rihanna, Post Malone.
Olivia Rodrigo, Morgan Wallen, Thomas Rhett. I get spoiled being able to be kind of genreless. I never know what's going to be on my plate. These fantastic people with Universal supply me with an abundance. It could be a polka band, it could be jazz, it could be a hardcore hip hop. So I get to stay fresh. Very lucky to do that.
Awesome.
That's it?
Hey, man.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kevin Reeves.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to East Iris. We're very glad to have you here. We love doing these things. I want to thank Christine, who always comes to us when she has stuff like this to do and gives us a chance to host it. It's something that we just love to do. We love sharing this place with everybody, and we are all very fortunate to be doing this stuff, especially in the Atmos lane. You know, we've all been very blessed by this thing. I've been with the UMG ecosystem way too long. Very long time, going back into the 1980s. I think probably David Leonard's the only one who's worked here longer than me. But and every time I think something's going to take the career out, something comes in, and Dolby Atmos was the latest thing for me. I was very skeptical about it, being an older person, and thought it's just going to be another version of something else, which it was not. From my very first listen of Rocket Man, I was smitten, and I remained skeptical on the outside because, of course, I couldn't, let my stoic personality be fooled. But I was giddy and wondering, what is this magic? And I still feel now, 6 years later, since being introduced by Christine and her team with the partnership that they have with UMG. What are we doing? This is amazing stuff. And I will wax poetic about how it makes me feel before I'll tell you a lot of technical stuff. So I hope I have something to say on this panel. But I'm a huge believer in it, and I hope all you guys are too. So we're happy to have you here. We love this place, and we're very glad to be playing a small part in what we're doing here with the community. So,
yeah, well, you guys have done so much amazing work mixing in Atmos, and kind of the next frontier, right? The next horizon for Dolby Atmos is creating original music in Dolby Atmos with low latency rendering, low latency monitoring, low latency recording in the integrated Pro Tools renderer. The tools with which to do that are accessible. They're there today. Creating your Dolby Atmos mix first, deriving your stereo from that. I'm going to hand it over to Greg to talk a little more specifically about that workflow and the benefits, but everything you've heard today, is kind of centered around that. There are creative reasons why, there are business reasons why, and kind of everything sort of in between. But let's get a little bit, Greg, into what it really is. What are we really talking about here in terms of creating original music this way, and why?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Well, I think it's exactly that. It's just creating in Dolby Atmos. It's that simple. So what I'd like to do is put on my developer's hat for a second. Some of you know that I spent many years developing something else, and I'm still very much a big fan of that. I use it every day. But as a developer, I think it's something that is something we don't get to really communicate with the creative community a lot. And I'm a musician, by the way. First and foremost, I am a musician. When we develop tools We develop them the best we possibly can with the technology with which we have available to us at that time. So I'd like, wherever you, and I look across this room and I see, all these beautiful faces, and I can also kind of, talk to some of you, and I know that some of you are newer in this journey as it pertains to Dolby Atmos. Some of you have been doing this a long time. So wherever you are in your journey, what I'd like you to do is just, you don't have to close your eyes, but if you want to close your eyes, you can, and think back to your first engagement with Dolby Atmos. Now, for some of you, that goes back, and I already see the brain synapses firing like 1024 milliseconds, external machine, RMU, all of these things, right? And amazing work was being done. And maybe, at the start, it all felt like it was being held together by tape and dreams and a desire to get somewhere, right? I was developing Pro Tools on that development team, and these are not easy things to do, right? That's not an excuse. But I make sure I mention that because start thinking about, looking forward and as different versions of the tools, the Dolby Atmos Renderer, certainly the DAWs as well, the album assembler coming to life. It's an iterative approach. So we want to get somewhere, but we're never going to get there, like whatever there is. We're always going to be enabling different workflows, different ways of doing things, new ways of doing things. And this is the really exciting thing that I find, and the main reason, Ben aside, why I decided to come to Dolby was the enablement of all of that. So today, with version 5.3 of the renderer, and also we have version 1.3 of the album assembler, there's a lot going on. But it's very simple to talk about. So I try not to overstate it. I try not to over-explain it because it's this simple. You have the ability right now, today, leveraging internal rendering. I think mostly. All right, where are my Pro Tools users in the room? That should be just about everybody. Okay. Where are my Logic users? All right, there are a few. Persona Studio One. Okay, so which is okay, but understanding that the DAWs I just mentioned, and there are a couple of others that have internal rendering as a part of the DAW. With internal rendering, what we're able to do is have the experience be a little bit more close to home. So you're working in your DAW, you have the renderer there available to you. Now, of course, the Dolby Atmos Renderer as a standalone application or working in tandem with the DAW, there's certain other things that you can do there, room setup, things of that nature. But internal rendering gives us the ability to be more, integrated. That's the very simple word, bless you. So therefore, we're able to do some things in terms of latency. So I knew, I thought about this getting on the plane the other day, getting on the plane to get here. I was telling myself, I'm going to say the numbers, and they're going to shake their heads. It's still not there. And okay, that may be the case. So in all of the DAWs I just mentioned, and you raise your hands about, and if you want to leverage creation in Atmos, you can get down to 32 milliseconds. Now, is it where you want to be? Well, maybe not, but it's certainly worth trying. It's certainly worth building a template to, of all of your essentials, your LFE feed, maybe a binaural, which obviously has to be at 512 or higher, and then all of your beds and objects, just to try things. So for me as a musician, I'm writing my new album. It's not about me. We're going to get to these guys in a second, but I just quickly wanted to validate that, all of the great tools and plugins and synthesizers and drum machines that I use, I'm able to run those directly into my session, and stuff is already sent to objects. That may not be where they end up, but you know what? It's a starting point for me, and it makes things really, really easy. So it's that simple. Now, of course, in Pro Tools, if you're using HDX, 64 milliseconds is where you're at. Now, there's that. Stereo Direct. I mean, it's that simple. It's really just you've now done all this work in Atmos. You've rendered your ADM, and it's as simple. I mean, I think Jeff did a really great job up here, better than I could have, talking through the Stereo Direct piece, and his workflow I think is fantastic. But going through and just rendering a 2.0 file. Now, of course, you want to listen to it, make sure everything's okay, but it's that simple if you needed to tweak some stuff to go back and do that. So you're kind of, was it measuring twice and cutting once? I'm really horrible with analogies and things like that. But that's the idea. So we are going to spend some time kind of showing it to you in Studio D, and maybe E. We'll walk through some of that stuff so you can actually see it. But I wanted to make sure I give that. And now wanted to turn it over to Dustin and Kevin, and I'll ask you guys. Maybe we'll start with you, Kevin. Can you maybe just give us a quick look at how things started in regard to you working in Dolby Atmos, and how things are going now in terms of the tools and in terms of how you're working?
Absolutely. A lot's changed, right? Because when we started out, there were certain things that we wanted, that we thought we needed, that we had hoped to have, that we didn't. And we had to sort of figure that out. And Dolby, of course, worked with us and heard what we had to say, and they keep giving us these great tools, some of which are for mastering, some of which are for doing what we're talking about. And we have been talking about creating an Atmos since the beginning. I know I have, because I always knew that as we tried to evangelize this thing, there was a lot of pushback in the beginning. A lot of people didn't understand it because they didn't have the same experiences that we were having inside of these rooms. And we were just thinking that you guys got to hear this. And of course, they were hearing it typically via the early binaural, which was not necessarily the best at that time. We knew that if we could get people to hear it, that it would be different. And so we're talking about creating in Atmos. There's so many different lanes. You look at somebody like Greg, who's actually writing music on the spot and doing it. I have always thought about recording people in a room like this to Dolby Atmos. And of course, in the beginning, in 2018, 2019, that was sort of a dream. These things are now closer to reality than you can imagine. We have gotten enough people in the rooms now to hear, especially artists, which is the key, that now they're thinking about creating in Atmos. And we know this because when we get their stems to do their Atmos mixes, they have things specifically labeled for Atmos synths or Atmos bells. They're thinking about it because they have been influenced by what we're hearing and feeling in these rooms. So Stereo Direct is a huge part of that, to be able to approach a mix like a lot of you probably do. Dustin and I are kind of different because we're usually getting stems to make an Atmos mix of an already existing stereo. And so I automatically thought, well, this is not going to be useful to me. And was I ever wrong about that? It's really great. Dustin's going to talk a little bit more about the monitoring stuff because he's got such a great workflow, and I could never explain it as well as he does. But I can tell you, for me, it gives me now a whole new way of thinking. And that's what this tool is. It's another toolbox item for you guys to use to be creative in a different way. And it's a great thing. It's not replacing anything. It's not canceling anything. It's just another enhancement that you guys can use if you choose to create this way. And it's already had some, Atmos has so much influence. I mean, I'm working with a producer who's producing albums that you all know. And we came in and we approached it from the usual standpoint. We're going to take the original stereos. This is a catalog project, 20, 30 years old. And we're going to try and make the Atmos different, but true to the stereo. And he was like, this is awful. This thing that we did 30 years ago sounds awful. And I want to do it differently. And so he flipped the script on me and said, we're going to redo all the stems. We're going to go back to the multi-tracks and we're going to re-EQ everything. We're going to make brand new mixes, and then we're going to make brand new Atmos. And that's how we've worked now on all the subsequent albums of this artist like that. And the Atmos is nothing like the stereo. And it's dreadful when you do the A-B comparison, because it's like, oh, that's what I remember. And oh, wow, this is completely new and different. And something like Stereo Direct now that I have, when we're doing work like that, I now have a great workflow to say, well, here's a stereo version of what we're doing now. That's what it's all about, right? Finding that if you guys are creating an Atmos at the beginning and not having to try and match something, this is a great tool for that. And so I was shocked, as I usually am with the Dolby stuff, like it's going to be all right. It's really good, and it's very compelling for me.
That's great. Yeah, Kevin, thanks. So Dustin, can you give us a little bit of your experience, how you started in terms of Atmos, where you are now, and then we would love to hear about your monitoring workflow.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me that's changed in Atmos, yes, the tools have come a long way, whether it's low latency or whether it's a panner, but the community's changed. People have started to, like, that's the biggest difference from then to now, is people are listening to it. Yeah. And people are reacting to it. People are getting in the room, which is exciting. And how do people listen has been not a concern, but you want to know how people are digesting what you're putting out. And we've had conversations as of late. The reality is, headphones are pretty darn important. I mean, what is it, 80%, 70%, whatever that number is, that people are listening on a daily basis. So the importance of making sure that this has the same impact as you're going to have sitting in the room, that has become more and more important each year to me. Whenever I start mixing now, as opposed to the beginning, I'm putting on the headphones first. I want to know what that feels like from the get-go. As far as what we're talking about with Stereo Direct, my workflow has been the same until Stereo Direct. That's been the biggest change in what I do on a day-to-day, because most of what I have to do is take a mastered stereo and I have to match that. So I'm not just mixing, I'm mixing and mastering kind of simultaneously, and being able to, I call it why wait? The why wait workflow. Get creative now. Like, the bummer was, I got to match the stereo. I got to go back and forth. I got to, get the EQ right, the compression's right. By the time I got things perfect where I wanted, I was a little cooked. My brain's kind of fatigued. My ears are fatigued. Now I'm moving it out in the Atmos, space. I'm putting it out in the room. And once Stereo Direct came out, I realized that maybe that was counterintuitive. Maybe the experience is more important. And I think it is, because that's what it's all about. So now, whenever I pull up my stems or multi-tracks or whatever it is, I start, like, to echo what Jeff was talking about, I just pull things out in the room. I start there. I go right into Atmos. Why wait to be creative? Get your creativity out front. The way your brain works after the first cup of coffee is a lot different than the third cup. And you're excited to be there. You just started a new day. Get into it. Get fun, be happy. And now with Stereo Direct, I get to a point where I'm like, yeah, this is cool. I feel it. Throw it in Stereo Direct, and because I'm matching a master, then I can start flipping back and forth on the S6. I'm an S6 guy with the little joystick. I like to feel the stuff move around the room. But then I can start comparing and get a little bit more technical towards the end of the day. And okay, maybe the limiter needs to come down a little bit more. Maybe I need to goose up the kick a little bit more. All those little details that I would have been thinking in the first few hours of my workflow now are kind of coming to the end of the day, if that makes sense. And it's really been working for me. Like, it's been translating. The mixes sound more fun. They sound more full. I'm utilizing more of the space every mix, and it's because of the Stereo Direct and the capability of that.
So translation is obviously a big deal. We've been, Ben's been talking about that. I mean, it is a very big, important point. So what you're saying, I mean, in terms of translation, like it's been a little bit more efficient for you, and you've got that confidence. Yes. In terms of translation.
And it's cutting down on time. I'm not tweaking so much on that stereo image from the get-go, and is that quite right? No, let me get that. No, let me get that. I'm finding that the translation from the room is still true at the end of the day in a stereo image, so I can worry about those little things there. I'd say I've cut off about 15 to 20 minutes at least per mix, which is huge. Whenever you have deadlines.
Yeah. Did you notice he looked at me when he said that?
Well, this guy feeds me, man. I'm going to make the deadline, I promise.
He's going to be there day and date. So one last question for me, for both of you, and then you please, Ben, if you've got anything. So in terms of projects and thinking about, as you guys get a lot of stuff that comes in. I know, Dustin, you mentioned, you're doing a lot of different genres. And I believe you're doing singles and albums. But for you both, things have changed over time where it feels to me that there's cases where you have you've got more freedom to kind of play in the space. Obviously, yeah, there are those times where it's very defined and you have to kind of match it to the original stereo. But as you feel a little bit more unshackled over time, what are some things that how do you approach some of that freedom in terms of how you're working in Atmos?
Well, I can tell you that I am very undisciplined.
Undisciplined, you write that down?
I'm very undisciplined. I'm also slightly unlearned in some of these things. Like what Dustin just told you is a perfect example of how in a UMG ecosystem, when we're trying to make something Atmos after a stereo, what he's talking about is exactly the way it should be done. Sitting down, listening to the stereo, immersing yourself in it, that's what I did there, immersing yourself in the stereo and sort of getting what that means, listening to the stems in stereo and matching your levels and stuff. I never hardly ever do that because I cannot wait to start moving things in the room. So I have never done it that way, and it's been a bad thing, I got to tell you, because then when I'm done thinking this is glorious, and then I go back and I start listening, I can hear how horrible my balances are, and it's going to be so far away from the stereo mix. And that's something that we all have to be cognitive of. It's not my mix. I am being charged with someone's art, and I'm being asked to make an immersive version of it. It's not my place to go in and figure things out and make them better or different. I had to learn that very early in my career. And so, unfortunately for me, I usually have to spend a lot of time then going back and fixing what I didn't do because I wanted to be, what was it? What's the trademark?
Why wait?
Why wait, right? I'm the poster child for Dustin's trademark phrase. Stereo Direct now is going to change that for me. I can already tell because, first of all, it's a reminder. Oh, I have a new tool. Oh, wait, stereo, I got to be cognizant of that. I can now do what I do bad and be a bad person and go do my Atmos, but I can also, while I'm doing that, go back and forth and see how that is being rendered down to 2.0. And then also it reminds me, okay, I better go back and check what's happening with the stereo. That's the biggest change from my workflow, which is very unorthodox. From the beginning, it's been unorthodox, especially being a mastering engineer. That's what I do in my other day job. I was around in the time when our own company supported the mantra and the narrative about we don't master Dolby Atmos. And I can tell you all, without any trepidation, that I have mastered every one mix that I've done from the beginning because that's just what we do as mastering guys. It's not something that we think about second. I had to figure a way out to do that. And it was cumbersome and sort of arduous, but it was important to do that. And now I have all kinds of different tools to do that. So these workflows that Dolby keeps making much more progressive are a good thing for someone like me. I'll just leave it at there.
Awesome, great.
Yeah, I mean, talking about like across genres and what to do, what not to do, I know it's maybe kind of a lame answer, but I really do just let the music speak. And if I have an EDM track, it's going to be a lot different than a Thomas Rhett true country record.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be just subtle movements. I can really get away with it, and I just let the music kind of tell me how crazy can I be. If that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Can I actually piggyback on that? So there's probably many Atmos mixers in this room. So can anybody tell me that if you have the same experience when you sit down in front of a mix? I can tell you, people say, why did you put the things here? Or why did you fly that thing there? And my answer is always the same. I'm not being mystical about it, or I'm not trying to be quippy. The music tells you what's right. Because I can tell you, when I do something that's stupid, the music says, this isn't good. Yeah. And you can tell this does not fit. It's really going to be kind of gimmicky. But when it's perfect, it's perfect. And that has nothing to do with me, I think, personally. I think that the music dictates that from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So does anybody else have that experience other than Dustin and I and David? Absolutely. Okay, that makes me happy because I thought maybe I was on to something, but I guess I'm not.
You're crazy.
It's true.
from the first listen, you start hearing it. You get that first listen, and by the chorus, you're like, oh man, I know where that's gonna go, and I can feel that above me. Obviously, you have to figure out what assets you have to deal with. Sometimes you're not able to do the things that you want to do because maybe you have groups of stems. Maybe you do have multi-tracks, and you get to be, super creative. But yeah, it'll tell you what to do with it. Just listen.
Right. Asking for a friend.
Aren't we always?
Yeah.
I heard you say stems, and I've heard you say sessions that you're working from.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because this came up in a Grammy meeting. I'm on the Grammy committee in Los Angeles at P&E.
Fantastic.
I'm sorry, Austin.
It's awesome.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Which do you work with more? Are you getting stems printed with effects or EQing and compression as it said in the mix? Or are you getting sessions with the raw files and all the plugins?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of speak to it.
What do you prefer to work with? The original sessions?
Well, I will say, since the emergence of Dolby Atmos and kind of its popularity growing within the engineering community, mixers are starting to understand and have been understanding what they need to send off. I always, if it's possible for the original mixer to send the stems the way that he intends them to sound, that's going to be ideal. I can represent you and the artist quickly that way.
I worked in the broadcast world for quite a long time.
Can't tell by your voice at all.
And great voice. I always had to send stems as deliverables.
Yes.
And I might have had 20, 30 40 pieces of music that I would have to stem out for a project.
Sure.
And, allowing then the other end user to create other versions of that, it was fine by me. I was grateful that I didn't have to create another 35 mixes for 1, 2.
Right.
Yeah.
But in this case, there's a couple things going on with that. One, of course, technically a question, but also I've heard concerns that engineers are getting a little sensitive about handing out what they consider their priority, their intellectual property.
Which would be the sessions.
I wondered where that's at, because I'm not dealing with that, and I thought it was a good question brought up by the person in the committee.
I completely understand that. I mean, and there are a lot of us in the engineering community who feel very protective of those things.
Sure.
For good reason. Some of us have been around long enough, and we know that the guy or the gal over there is going to try and steal my stuff. That's probably very minimal, but it is something that you do specifically. I mean, that's your creation. I would probably be thinking about maybe an alternate way to deliver a session without giving them everything that I have. So, and not because I'm scared somebody's going to see what I'm going to do. Believe me, I'm not doing much. But there are guys who do crazy magical things in these sessions. So I can see that, and I would respect that. I can tell you for me, creative intention is key. Mm-hmm. And I want to be able to work from something that has all of the creative intention of the artist, the engineer, and the producer when they send it to me. So I can't mess that up, and I can't interpret it. It shouldn't be for me to do that. So as Dustin said, the stems, especially for frontline stuff that we're receiving now, are getting so much better over the last 3-4 years. But sometimes there isn't stuff for the catalog stuff that we do. Sometimes we have to go back to the multi-tracks, which is a whole other ball game.
And that's when the multi-tracks really come into play, is catalog work, when those are the assets that they were asked to supply at that time. Yep. And this could be the 80s, 70s, 90s, but rarely do I get the original session. When I do, I honor it, to a T as much as possible, and keep my lips sealed if there are any secrets. But again, if they want to keep that information, proprietary, being able to ask them to print those stems, and keep the wizard behind the curtain, then that's totally fine, and we'll take the stems. But the frontline stuff is mostly stems. The catalog stuff gets a little, little
and the frontline stuff is typically, at least in our ecosystem, is what's needed yesterday. So the less work that we have to do to forensically try and figure out what's happening and make sure that we're being true to the creative intent of those artists, that's the most important thing for us. So give us that and we're happy. So.
Thank you.
I have a question about what you're describing as the frontline work, and maybe it's a bit naive, but if you can help, me at least understand how it compares to the era where, let's say, I guess there are a couple points of comparison. A tracking engineer records an album working with the producer and the artist. Perhaps that engineer mixes it, and so the intent is understood and things are recorded appropriately to the goals, but the result is a two mix. Similarly, for decades, there might be the workflow that someone else mixes those tracks.
That's right.
The producers are probably involved, so the original intent is still carried through. By comparison with the things you're describing as modern, sort of current frontline things, when that project is recorded, how often is it that the stereo reference, right, that might be created during those sessions that people are monitoring and vibing to, is that the actual release stereo that might be out there in the marketplace as available to a consumer in parallel with the Atmos product that you're being asked to create? And how does that compare to, forgive me if I'm being naive, the goal of Atmos being the only inventory, and as a result, the stereo product being available to those who want to monitor in stereo, right? But
Yes.
from that master immersive concept.
Well,
I just wonder where the capability, the technology versus the music industry workflow collide, or how they compare in your experience.
well, what a great question, right? Because when we're talking about all of the stuff, and I'll give you a couple of just my experiences, but this is exactly going to be the first question as we move into a new workflow of creating in Atmos in the beginning. All of that stuff is going to come into play, and now we've made it much easier to give the stereo deliverable with Stereo Direct. It actually is going to seem easier for people who choose to work that way. But to answer your question, for us, anything that we're doing, frontline or catalog, we absolutely insist that we have a stereo reference because we have to be true to those creative intentions. If we don't, and I'm going to speak for myself, not for Dustin or anybody else in the room, you tend to sort of take liberties that you probably shouldn't. And we have to be responsible with other people's art. It has to be done that way. So we always ask for one. Sometimes the mix is a mix and not a master because it hasn't been mastered yet. But for the most part, they know the importance of delivering a mastered stereo to us to use as a reference. And it's almost become commonplace where we don't really have to ask for it too much anymore. But in the beginning, let's say in 2018, 2019, when we were just working mostly on catalog stuff, we were referencing the released stereos from that era. So to me, it's a very important step. And for anything that we're doing that's modern or frontline, however you want to categorize it, we're asking for that first. And when we deliver the stems, that's good. I see all my stems are here. I don't see a stereo mix reference. Can you send that over too? All the time. So,
May I address one point?
Please.
Sorry, 'cause I think it's a really important point that you made. Your question, supposed, if I understood you properly, that the Atmos mix was the only deliverable and that's the goal. I have not heard that goal.
No.
I have not witnessed that goal.
Yeah, I mean, just
The-
speaking for UMG only, we deliver stereo and Atmos for everything.
Everyone does. And it's the requirement of this streaming service, which makes perfect sense to us. But also it's what you all want, and that is great. We are supportive of that. So just to be clear, the reason for delivering both is twofold. One is technical, which is to ensure that regardless of what the playback system is, what the setup is, what the wiring is, what the disposition is, there is always a song to play. There's always a file to send, if you will. And two, that if you prefer the stereo experience, that you're able to choose to have the stereo experience.
Yeah.
Never do we want it to not be intentional either, just to be clear and certain. I know that we always address that, but I just want to say it again. the goal of creating an Atmos and deriving your stereo mix is not that you do not have an intentional deliverable that is stereo. It is that you have more creative empowerment from the beginning and that you have a more efficient workflow, but that you make conscious choices about how you handle the stereo mix as well as the Atmos mix. I just want to make sure that that's clear for everyone from the Dolby perspective.
One quick thing though on your question around the Dolby Atmos kind of deliverable in terms of thinking about getting all the assets together and either archiving that or if that's going to then be used for whatever other things that can happen. Remember that you can encapsulate all of that in a session for both. So just like Jeff was talking and we've been talking a little bit about the ability to be able to work in Atmos and create an Atmos first and kind of see that entire process all the way through and then derive your stereo. All of that is encapsulated, and I'll use Pro Tools as the example, in a Pro Tools session. Now, within that session, you can certainly stem stuff out and then re-import it back in so you have it there, do some hiding of the original assets, or, there's a few different workflows around that, but it can be encapsulated in one thing. So
And that's fundamental, right? Because one of the main drivers has been to support the challenges that have been realized with assets, right? Assets lost, assets missed, assets, treated in a certain way. You have those assets inherent from the beginning.
Yeah.
As a slight follow-up, I guess I was curious to what extent you guys see us being in a transitional or quickly having switched into a new mode, similar to the way that the broadcast industry delivers in terms of streaming, terrestrial or OTT, Dolby 5.1. At home, we get our stereo in a down mix if that's what you choose to hear. And while most movies might have, on an 8-channel delivery, your 5.1 and your LR, which is probably deliberately checked or tweaked in some way. The grail, again, has seemed to be sometimes that, well, there's just one thing now, and that the stereo, and everyone says, oh, it takes more time, it's going to cost more to invest in that dedicated stereo if one wants. And what I'm hearing is that you guys are experiencing, and this is cool, that the producers, the artists, the engineers are still looking at creating that dedicated stereo mix.
Yes.
This is complementary, compatible in some
100%.
way. And I guess maybe I've just experienced some confusion in the online marketplace. What am I hearing or buying? Who is this am I hearing a down mix of the Atmos? Usually that's pretty obvious if it is. Or where do I find that dedicated stereo? Or are people going to maintain creating that?
Certainly,
Yeah.
like I said, speaking for UMG, yes, we consider them two unique works of art, and we very much are delivering both, and very intentionally saying for stereo playback, whether, as Christine was mentioning, that's a device-driven situation or preference that the consumer can access the stereo or the Atmos. Now, different services present those differently, right? And you have preferences typically on how you're served the content, depending on that service. But we do very intentionally create and supply both, and that we actually have very specific language in our agreements with the DSPs to not downmix Atmos to stereo, but to use the appropriate stereo master track.
I appreciate your clarification, right? Thanks. And the candor, it may be, either obvious to you or touchy if you feel about where the budgets are going and how people are working. In the SACD days that Greg and I were talking earlier, at least on that disc you had the two products baked in, and so it's obvious you can listen to the stereo layer or the 5.1.
Yeah, you have to actually go and choose.
Yeah. And it's gotten fuzzier. So thanks for explaining.
Yeah, I don't think the intention is to replace the stereo art form or anything like that.
Not at all.
Just kind of, newer ways to work, newer ways to derive your stereo if you'd like.
Fun or fast, as Dustin likes to say.
Fun fast.
Isn't that kind of based on if it's a catalog project versus a new project? Because if it's a catalog project, that stereo mix
It's already
It
there.
exists.
20 years ago, that's baked in.
Yeah.
And the consumer, the listeners, that's what they know.
Right.
And it's really tricky. It's a slippery slope.
Yes.
To go back and try
Yes,
to
indeed.
match that, because having mixed a lot of those things, I guarantee you some of those tools do not exist anymore. You're never going to match it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's kind of so I guess that's more of a catalog kind of quandary.
Yeah, I can see that point. I mean, there's magic in those old mixes, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
Find the Google song today.
Yeah.
yes, so, and then and again,
Find one, you know, it's like, but that was those would be key elements of a mix.
yep. And harping on the thing again about creative intent. I have no say. I have no say in going back and making that different or better. It is perfect. Yeah, we've all loved it for 80 years, or however long it's going to be. I'm not going to change that. However, here's an immersive version of that. That's
Right. But
something different and something cool.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to be the exact same thing. And to your note, like, you know, there's pieces of gear that I've had to study eras so much more, and where were they working, maybe? What were they working with, perhaps? Who was producing, who was engineering, you know, finding those things out. And you get it as close as you can, and then get it to a piece of the team from the original A&R or management or the artist, if we're lucky. And hopefully get that approval, you know, for that thing. But yeah, it's always going to be a little bit different. I mean, it's different. Yeah, yeah.
The intent is different as well.
Sure.
Absolutely.
100%.
That was my point. It's like they're kind of two different.
Mediums.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The expression of Dolby Atmos is a different experience. Absolutely.
Question for you, Greg. With the 5.3 update on the renderer with the 2.0 direct, so does that have different encoding when you listen to it compared to the regular 2.0?
Yes. So the previous 2.0 was passed through 5.1.
Okay.
So it was a render down from that. So with that, there were, you know, some inherent differences in terms of when you were playing back that 2.0. With the 2.0 direct, it's its own separate render. It does not pass through 5.1. It's its own thing.
And it's derived directly from the
Derived
mix.
directly, exactly. And you do have the ability, which we can show you, I know we're going to split out into those rooms now, you do have the ability to, you know, if you needed to adjust some trims, you can do that. And now that 2.0 metadata does not travel to the ADM. That's, you know, but it's its own re-render. Yeah. The 2.0 direct. We still keep the original legacy 2.0 because some people still like it. They want to use it. So we're not trying to take it away. That's still there. But it's, yeah, you'll see it labeled 2.0 and 2.0 direct.
No, Kevin and Dustin, real quick question for you. Whenever you're mastering or delivering your final mix in Atmos, does the binaural limiter mean anything to you guys, or are you smacking that as hard as you can? Doesn't really matter. Yeah, because you know.
I see you've been around the block a few times.
Yeah,
Question.
It's being recorded right now.
yeah.
Well, that's why I will astutely let Dustin answer this one.
I have been known to touch that limiter hard.
In a loving way.
So being able to be close to the quality control team within Universal, I know that my target across the board at maximum is minus 18 LUFS, right? So I find that whenever I'm staying in that, even if I'm going through an album, sometimes it's hitting 19.20, 19.5, 18.3. I find that if you honor that minus 18, that limiter doesn't really cause any problems, because you have to take in consideration we're not going above a -1 true peak as well. So I haven't really run into issues in the beginning when there was the Wild West and there's no, you know, I'm coming in -12, -14.
Oh,
yeah,
glorious.
that was an issue on the headphones. But yeah, I haven't really.
Are there any platforms that that play the MP4 drive from the Atmos ADM, or like streaming services that will provide the MP4 as playback?
In terms of DSPs?
Yeah, or like even film, or
It's really down to what, again, Kurt was pointing to, which is that it provides is that between the relationship between the content owner and the streaming service. So whatever action is being taken on the service is being taken, and again, in partnership with the content owner. So coming out of the other end sometimes, of course, may be a little bit different based on your settings and.
Oh yeah, no, I was just asking if there's where is the MP4 actually getting played anywhere? Because if you are smacking that,
Yeah.
it's gonna get crushed.
Right.
So like, is anybody actually gonna hear that, or is it not? Is that not getting played to anyone?
Are you, sorry, just trying to understand the question a bit more. Are you talking about
The binary
physical MP4 file being played somewhere?
Yeah, like if
Being
it's
streamed?
if it gets rendered somewhere, for, like gets derived from the ADM and gets submitted.
I mean, it's going to go through the same MP4 encoding process at some point, but there's level management and other things that are happening on the front end of the encoder. So I'm not sure it's an absolute. If you're asking, is there a one-to-one relationship with what you're seeing in the binaural renderer?
No. But I think he answered the question.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, I feel like if you're hearing it crushed when you're printing, it's probably going to be heard crushed. You know, so again, if you're honoring that -18 and a true peak of -1, you're probably going to be good. Yeah, in my experience.
In other words, crush away.
Yeah, have at it, man.
Crush responsibly.
Get it.
Crush responsibly.
Yeah.
Do we want to
Yeah,
separate
we're
into
at
the
4 o'clock
couple
now.
of
I
rooms?
think that's
Yeah.
a great
One more
time.
question.
Oh,
John.
For stereo direct, when it's folding it down to a stereo direct, obviously it's going to be taking panning information and doing that. But is there anything else going on? Is it accounting for any sort of like virtual timing between the channels within that virtual space?
It's counting for everything. So it's taking all of the metadata into that's all aggregated to get to that 2.0. So all of that is, I don't want to say it's flattened. It's not a flattening process, but it is rendering it based on the metadata that's provided. So remember, with Dolby Atmos, it's an object-based format, which means that regardless, it's meant to scale regardless of the number of speakers, the number of whatever, that you'll get the idea is that you get the best possible execution of that file, and that's included in the 2.0 Direct. So it takes all the metadata into consideration. Now, there are a couple things, when Jeff was up here, he talked about like getting 90%, 95% of the way there. We still, obviously, we always recommend that you listen back to it, and certainly, in Dustin's case, going back and forth and monitoring, there might be some things you hear. Certainly if you're leveraging center channel, you might want to pay close attention, certainly on vocals, things like that. If you're leveraging Phantom Center, then usually you'll find that, it's going to translate perfectly. Now, that's not to say that there might be certain elements based on frequency and position that, again, I know I harp on it, but the whole thing around psychoacoustics, it's a real thing. So your mind and heart and your ears might have gotten used to something in a certain way, and when you actually go and monitor it in 2.0, you are going to hear some things differently, right? That is going to happen. So to answer your question, it is taking all of that metadata and doing the job of translating that to a 2.0 file. But you still want to make sure that you're listening and using your ears to make sure. I mean, again, it really, a lot of times it's center channel material, certainly vocals, that might tend to punch out a little bit more, but your experience will vary. But always make sure you're listening, and checking. That's one of the reasons this is here. You can actually just render something out, give it a listen, take it to the car, take it to your friend's house, and check it.